Thank you for coming. Today's session is entitled Intro to TypeScript. My name is Noah Sager. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, and I'm here with...
My name is Kelly Hutchins. I am a product engineer, technically on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript team, but I work mostly with ArcGIS Online configurable apps.
Awesome. And this presentation is already on GitHub, so if you want to take a screenshot of the screen now, or if you want to come to the island afterwards, we can share the link with you. But all the slides and the demos that you see will be available online. They're available right now online. All right, so let's get started. So today's agenda, we're going to cover what is TypeScript, we're going to tell you why to use TypeScript, and go over the basics of the setup and the first steps for actually working with TypeScript and the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. We'll spend the majority of our time on a live action demo, because this is a demo theater and you want to see us get our hands dirty with the code. And then we'll leave you with some useful links and references for more information. And of course, we're both at the island for the rest of today and tomorrow.
It went,
Oh.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so I'll know it's not to touch the table. All right, so what is TypeScript? So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, which means that existing JavaScript applications are also valid TypeScript applications. So what TypeScript does, it adds the benefit of optional static typing. So while JavaScript is a loosely typed language, TypeScript can be a strongly typed language that can give you a lot of benefits in creating applications. Lastly, when you make a TypeScript application, it gets compiled into JavaScript. So what you have at the end is a complete JavaScript application that you wouldn't even necessarily know was written in TypeScript. Where do I begin? So the best place to start is the actual TypeScript page itself. TypeScript was invented by Microsoft, and it's completely, the documentation is very readable, and you can download it and you can learn the ins and out of the language itself. Today we're going to cover using TypeScript with our API. We're not going to go into too much detail about the language itself, but this is a great resource for the fundamentals of TypeScript, the programming language. All right, developer setup. So if you're working with TypeScript and the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, the best place to start is in our guide page. We have a topic called TypeScript, setting up your development environment. And here it goes over all the ins and outs of actually beginning your first TypeScript application. We have some sample code on GitHub that you can actually run a real demo, and you copy and paste the code in. You build it, compile it, and then you can actually see the application when you're done. So this is a great place that you want to start and get the fundamentals of the typings and things like that we're also going to cover here. All right, why use TypeScript? So now I got to sell you on it. So the first thing, as I said, is it adds type support to JavaScript. So basically, JavaScript is loosely typed. You can create any sort of variable and give it any sort of value, and it doesn't matter if you tell it's going to be an integer or a string. With TypeScript, you have the ability to define what those variables are going to be. So in this function, add feature layer here, I have two parameters. I have a URL parameter, and I have a legend enabled parameter. Now you notice the colon after those parameter names, and it's a little small on the screen. Let me see if I can blow that up for you. Oh, it doesn't blow up the image. So you have URL colon string, and you have a legend enabled colon boolean, which means that the URL is going to be of type string, and the legend enabled will be of type boolean. So this tells me later when I go back to review my code, or any other people who look at my code afterwards, it tells them exactly what the code is doing. And so when they see those variables further down in the code, they know exactly what kind of variable or property those variables are expecting. And then down at the end, I have an add feature layer function where I pass in the URL and I pass in a Boolean value. So another benefit to having TypeScript is if you use a modern IDE, and on our team we use Microsoft Visual Studio Code quite a bit, you get this enhanced IDE support. So in this code snippet, I have the same two variables. I have URL and legend enabled, and I've given them the same types as the previous code snippet. So URL is type string, legend enabled is type boolean. But this time I passed in an integer for the URL value. And the IDE actually gives me this little squirrely red underscore under URL, and it tells me that the argument of type 12345, which is an integer, is not assignable to a parameter of type string. So this makes it really easy to find bugs before you actually try to run your application. So as you're actually writing the code, the IntelliSense will tell you, is this code valid or not? So you're going to catch bugs that much quicker. And if you hand your project off to someone else, it's going to be a lot easier for them to understand what they're doing, because the IntelliSense will tell them they have an issue already. And if you worked with JavaScript before, you know this is something that is kind of lacking in the JavaScript world. Another benefit to TypeScript is it makes use of the latest JavaScript features. So for example, if you're used to working with promises, where you can have a lot of nested functions in .then or .when statements, using TypeScript, you can actually make use of the async await functionality, and this can make your asynchronous code a lot smaller and a lot easier to read. Another thing you can do is called dynamic imports. So if you ever heard the concept of lazy loading, which is a term that I love, but I never knew what it really meant, it means basically you could have a module that doesn't get required until you actually need it. So I can nest this module require statement inside an asynchronous function, and until that function is called, it's not going to bother loading the module. So this saves me time in running the application, and also saves me a little bit of bandwidth when people are interacting with the app. All right, so the setup and the first steps. So the first thing you want to do now that I've sold you on using TypeScript is work with Node and NPM. You want to install TypeScript globally, and it's a really simple command, npm install -g TypeScript. And then you want to get the ArcGIS API for JavaScript typings. When you get the JavaScript typings, this enables you to get that cool IntelliSense that you saw on the screenshot earlier when you work with all of our API. So lots of different products will have their own typings. This version is ours, and it gets updated with every release. And you'll find all this information in that initial guide page that I pointed to you before. All right, so I gave you the basics. It's kind of a lot of information. Now Kelly's going to show you how to actually do the thing with TypeScript.
Great, thanks, Noah. How many people are already working with TypeScript? A couple of people. Okay, great. So we're going to go through like just a quick demo, or not a quick demo, but an introductory demo on working with TypeScript. So what I'm going to do is take this sample that's in JavaScript from the SDK, and I'm going to convert this same sample to use TypeScript instead. So it's pretty introductory. If you're already a TypeScript expert, you're probably going to know all this stuff. So let me go to my file system. I have an empty folder. I'm just going to drag it into Visual Studio Code, which is the IDE I'm using. And I'm going to expand it. So Noah went over that you already have to have NPM installed, and you've already installed TypeScript, right? So we've got that done. Now we're ready to start building our app. So I have a app folder and a CSS folder. So I'm going to add index.html. So this is going to be just like you would with a JavaScript app. We're just going to get started. I'm going to use this thing called Emmet in Visual Studio Code and other IDEs that lets me use a lot of shortcuts. I sort of hate typing, especially in live demos. So I can just hit exclamation point, tab, and it stubs out the HTML. So if you see something happening really quickly, it's because I'm using this Emmet syntax to just plop it in there so you guys don't have to watch me type it out. I also have some Visual Studio Code snippets for things that I type all the time, so I can be lazy and just type JS API. Hit tab, and that's going to throw in the links to the JavaScript API. So these are Visual Studio Code snippets. They're also time savers. And the last thing that I need is a div where my where my map is going to render. So I'm going to tab that out and save it. So there's nothing in here that's any different than you would do in a JavaScript app. It all looks the same. I'm going to next add a link to a CSS file. And that's just going to make my map full page, because the sample we were looking at is just a full page app. And I'm going to do some more magic typing to get that full map CSS. So now we're done with our setup. We have an app, just like we would a JavaScript app, and we're ready to start doing some TypeScript. So we need a few things first. The first thing we need is this thing called a package.json. We'll open up a terminal in Visual Studio Code. And from the terminal, I can do npm init. This creates a package.json. If I just hit return right now, it would ask me a few questions and generate a package.json. But I'm just going to say --yes, which will accept all the defaults. So we can see that it added this new file called package.json. And this is just going to be where all the information about the packages that I install is going to be kept. So let's see what gets written in here. Noah mentioned that we have to install the typings for the JS API. Actually, so it's going to install it, and you can see that there's now this dependencies section, and it threw the types.arcgis-js-api, and it tied it to a version. So this is 4.10, which is the latest. So now if you give this package to somebody else and they npm install, it's going to come and read this package.json. It's going to know that this app has a dependency on that package, and it's going to install that for them. That installs the typings, which are the type definitions that we need to work with the JS API through TypeScript. So it installs that file, and we're actually ready to start writing code now. The next thing we need is this file called tsconfig. Tsconfig defines the compiler options that TypeScript needs. So I'm going to add a new file at my root directory. This is saying, hey, we're working with TypeScript. We have a TypeScript file. I mentioned I was lazy. Oh, wait, it's got to have a .json extension. Okay. So I mentioned I was lazy, so I have those Visual Studio Code snippets also for tsconfig. So let's tab one out, and it throws all the stuff in there for me. This is nice for tsconfig because you use a lot of the same options in every project, and it's a quick way to get up and running. Some of the important things in this file is this module AMD. You have to set the module to AMD because JS API needs that, and it has to compile or transpile that TypeScript back to AMD JavaScript. So you need that. Source map we'll talk about at the end, how that might be helpful. It's not something you have to do, but I personally find it helpful, at least during the dev. JSX and JSX Factory, you only need to worry about for custom widgets, so we don't actually need them in this demo. We're not building a custom widget. Target ES5 is important if you have to support browsers that don't support ES6 syntax and you're using it in your app. So it's got to transpile that JavaScript back to ES5 supported JavaScript. So this is especially important if you're using ES6 capabilities like fat arrow functions and template literals and a lot of the other capabilities we want to take advantage of. Including, you don't need to have this. If you don't include the folder where your TypeScript is, it's just going to transpile everything. In this case, we just have one TS file, so we'll include that. Okay, so now we're ready to actually start writing our TypeScript code. So I'm going to create a file in here called main.ts, and we're ready to write TypeScript. So let's go back to that sample, and I'm going to copy the JavaScript. So I'm just going to grab this whole require thing, copy it, and paste it. And the first thing that we're going to do is get rid of the requires, which makes me really happy. I don't know about you guys, but I always hated writing this. You have to have the modules in the same order as their arguments, and it just gets really long, and it always feels kind of clunky. So I'm just going to get rid of that thing. I'm going to keep these things so we know what we need to import. And then instead, we're going to use this import syntax. So I'm going to say import. The first thing I need to import is the web map. So I'm going to say import web map from Esri/webmap. And can you guys see as I'm typing, code assist comes up? So that's really nice. That's one of the things we get, because of those typings, we kind of get that for free. So it's really cool. You could say import map view from Esri views map view, and then import layer list from Esri widgets layer list. Get rid of these guys. Let's see, why are these hollering at me? One thing I need in here is, this is back in tsconfig. If I want to use that syntax import something from something, we need to set this ES module interop to true. Now if I go back to main.ts, I'm not sure why it's hollering at me. Let's hope for the best. I might have an extension turned on. All right, well, I'm going to hope that if I type TSC, which does the TypeScript compiler, that I don't get any errors. Why do we do this? I'm going to go to the other project just because I think there's probably something super simple in here that it's hollering at me. I think I have an extension turned on. We're doing this again later. We'll get it figured out by then. So it's working here. If I look at my TS config, I have that ES module interrupt. I'm going to bring up my command. Type TSC. Let's try it this way. Okay, for some reason it's working here. I'm going to go back to the other project and then try one thing. If not, we're just going to come back here. One other thing that you can do, and that I always do, is I add a script to package.json that's just got the command. So in this case, a dev, which is tsc-watch, which will start watching all my TypeScript files. And then when I make changes to them and save them, it's going to transpile it to JavaScript. So I'm going to save that. In Visual Studio Code, you can right-click and run script. And why is this hollering at me? All right, I give up. Back to the other one. Sorry, guys. If you want to come back at 1:30, this will work. Okay, so now we have this working here. We can run the app. And you do the live demo index.html. And here's our app running. So, sorry that didn't work out and seemed a little clunky. I think it's just an extension that was interfering. But basically, you create a package.json, tsconfig, install the JavaScript typings, and then you can pretty much just copy paste that JavaScript, change those requires to imports, and you're good to go. Now, there's more things that you might want to consider doing because you're in TypeScript. You can set types. So here we are using one of those types that Noah mentioned. He showed you with the colon. You can type things. So here we have a layer list, and in the layer list we have this function that runs when each item is created, and we want to show the legend for items that have legends enabled. So these items are these things called Esri list items, so we can type them, and then we have code assist, and things work correctly. And you can't use things that aren't Esri items or Esri list item panels. Those are some of the TypeScript things that we can do as type things. Some of the ES6 things we can do is we can use const and let instead of var and take advantage of those capabilities. We can use fat arrow functions, which are really nice features of ES6. If you haven't worked with them, check them out. They make your life easier, especially in respect to what this is. You can also do, one of my favorite things is this example right here. We create the map view, we pass in the container, which is the view div. And then you notice the second property, I just have it set to map. In ES6, if the name of the value you're passing into that property is the same as the property name, you could omit it, map. You don't have to do that. You can just say map, and it knows that it's looking at that map up there. So it's just a nice little time saver, I think. I think that was all the sort of fancy ES6 things we do in here. So let's go back to the slides. A few other things that I think are nice. Again, I'm sorry, this is really small. Noah shared with you the GitHub repo that has the code so you can look at it. I also have a script for the demo where every step is written out so you can go through it and it'll just work for you because you're not standing in front of a group of people. I use this all the time because when you're working with TypeScript, you don't really care about those JavaScript files. If you want to hide the JS and the .js map file, you can, and you do it by setting this property in the preferences, and that means that all you'll see in Visual Studio Code is the TypeScript files. The JavaScript files will still be there, but they won't be cluttering up your development environment. So here I have like main.js, main.js.map, and main.ts. So the JS gets created when we transpile, and the js.map is the source map that I'll show you how we use that in just a second. If you look at that JavaScript file, it's kind of convoluted JavaScript that gets emitted from the transpiler. You can sort of make sense of some of it, but it's not, I've never found much reason to go in and read it unless I'm troubleshooting an issue. So I just tend to hide those in here with that trick. The next thing that's useful is I mentioned that in tsconfig you can enable source maps. So they're super useful when you're debugging. Because if you don't have source maps enabled and you're debugging and you set a breakpoint, you're setting a breakpoint in that JavaScript that's generated from the TypeScript compiler. And it's kind of hard to read and you don't always easily know what's going on in your app. So if I still have that app running, which I do, and I go into the developer tools, and I go to my sources, I can see that I have main.js and main.ts, and because I have source maps enabled, I can set breakpoints in the actual TypeScript file, which is what I'm working with and what looks familiar to me. So I can debug in here instead of having to debug in this JavaScript and then figure out where it is in the TypeScript. So that's a helpful tip, I think. The other one is we actually use this in the demo. So we want to import modules every time we're using the new keyword. So I'm creating a new map view. I need to import the map view module at the top of my file, right? But there are some cases where we're not actually importing a module. We just need to use the typing so TypeScript is happy. We just need to say, hey, this list item is of type Esri list item. So what you could do is you could import the Esri list item module and then do that as Esri list item. Or you can just use this __ Esri module. It has just the type definitions, not the code, but you can use it to tell TypeScript this thing is a list item or this thing is something that I'm not creating. So here I just say event.item as __ Esri.list item. I don't always like that __ Esri in my code. So usually if I'm using that at the top, I import __ Esri and set it equal to Esri. So then in my app, I can just Esri.list item. So again, remember you can only do this if you're not using new, if you're not creating an instance of the class. But you'll find that there are lots of times when you need to type something. Maybe you're using it in the constructor properties and you just need to say this is of some type, and you can do that with __ Esri. And then we have a link with some more info. And importantly, there's a full hour-long TypeScript session that's given later today with Renee Rubakavla and Stefan. That's got a lot of good information, so I suggest going to that one too to get way more details than we could cover in this quick half hour. And if you want to see the demo working, we're doing this one again at 1:30 this afternoon. I think we have some time for questions if people have them. Oh, great. He's got the times for the next session here. And the survey, take the survey, yes. The typings, yeah. Yeah, so the question was, will that typings package that we install with npm install at types/ArcGIS JS-API, he asked if that version would always match up with the JS API version, and the answer is yes. I think there's like a small delay after we release, maybe like a day or two before you'll get the latest typings. But yes, it should match. Yeah. Can you install a previous version? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe the typings might be available on the GitHub repository for an older version. Let me look. Noah, do you know? I'm just going to go look and see. I mean, one way you can do it is you can just hold on to the latest typings when you install it, but you'd have to be working at that older version. And I wonder if you change the version in npm in your package.json. So I guess there's one thing I would try first is in package.json. We have the version here. I would try and set it to like whatever version you're interested in. So here it's 4.10. If you wanted like 4.9, you could change it in here and then type npm install. And I think that would do it. Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, this is probably the place to change it. Yeah, so the question is after you transpile what you actually need to deploy to the server, it just needs the JavaScript. You wouldn't have to deploy the TypeScript out there. If you want to use the source maps and debugging, you would have to. But in our index.html file, it's actually looking for the JavaScript, not the TypeScript. So the app's using the transpiled JavaScript. The TypeScript is just what we're writing it in. Then we transpile it to JavaScript, which is what the browser and the app understands. Sure.
Have you ever had any issue
So the question is, have you ever had any issues debugging when there's some anomaly between the JavaScript and the TypeScript and the source maps are running into problems? I have not had any specific problems regarding that. I don't know, Noah, have you ever run into that? No, I mean, I think that the source maps seem to be working pretty well for me. I sometimes, especially when I was learning TypeScript, had plenty of issues debugging within my TypeScript and getting it right. But I haven't had any problems with the source maps. If you've had something specific, we can look at it and try and help you figure out what's going on. Yeah, so the question was, do you like TypeScript and is that the way you're doing development? I'll be 100% honest with you here. When I first started learning TypeScript a little over a year ago, hated it. The typings were hard, there were lots of errors in it. I spent a ton of time bothering the developers, why isn't this working? I don't understand this, I hate this. But then I would say after about 2 months of struggling with it, I really came to like it. I like the types, I like the code assist. I know this isn't the huge benefit to using TypeScript, but I love working with the ES6 syntax and just having it easily transpile back without having to worry about Babel and plugins and all that. So I really enjoy working with TypeScript. Our JavaScript API code base is 80% TypeScript
It's
now.
closer to 90%.
So internally, we're actually using it. I don't know what your feelings are about TypeScript.
Yeah, I have the same first impressions. At first, it's really difficult. I love having the enhanced IDE support. I think that helps a lot. But it's a learning curve. It takes a lot more effort to write the same app in TypeScript than in JavaScript at first. And eventually you'll reap the rewards of working with TypeScript. But our team is moving to purely developing with TypeScript. If you want to do any custom widget development with the API, you have to use TypeScript. So we're slowly trying to get people onto the TypeScript train.
And I would say that one tip is if you're using TypeScript, use Visual Studio Code. Even if maybe you were not a fan of Visual Studio products that you worked with in the past, Visual Studio Code I think is a great IDE. I think some of my problems at the very beginning were trying to get it working with Sublime Text. I spent way more effort than I felt like I had to get things up and running. Once I switched to Visual Studio Code, there's great integration for TypeScript, and it was a lot easier. So if you're working with TypeScript and you're not already set up and in love with a particular development environment, I would say give Visual Studio Code a try. It'll make your life a little bit easier in the TypeScript area. And the typings are way better now. If you looked at TypeScript a year ago and you started trying to write an app and then nothing worked right and it was super frustrating, we've found, because we're using TypeScript internally, we found and fixed a lot of those errors. Customers have reported a lot of the problems with the typings. So if you gave it a shot, a year or so ago and you found it frustrating, come back to it. I promise you it's way, way better now.
But do you have any thoughts on comments on integrating with other third-party React, Angular?
So the question was, do you have any comments on integrating with React or Angular? I don't specifically. I've done a little bit with React. I'm not an expert, but if you go to the other session with Renee and Stefan, Renee especially has done work with React, and he could probably give you a better answer on that question. But I've used it with TypeScript in one app, so I'm not an expert, but it was fine. It seemed to work really well. Well, thanks guys for coming. We appreciate it. And again, I'm really sorry about the demo. I don't know.